morning, everyone. Good morning.
Good morning, Lucy. Good morning.
Can you all hear me well?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank
Good
you.
morning.
Good morning to good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. And I want to thank you all very much for honoring our invitation and for sparing time off your very busy schedules to attend our webinar. My name is Lucy Sewe, and I will moderate this session on my own behalf and on behalf of Hekima University College. As you all know, Hekima is well known for its very professional courses and other services, particularly on peace and security. And so we are very happy to host you today. And we are hoping that after this, you'll develop appetite to attend the rest of our courses coming up in the course of the year. So first, thank you very much once again for sparing your time. We have convened this webinar in order to give you a snippet of the certificate course, which is coming up. And I am sure you have all seen the poster on that certificate course in conflict resolution, peace building, in conflict resolution, peace building and reconciliation. I'm sure you have all seen that course, that poster. This course will take place from June 3rd to June 10th this year, and it will be an online course. We shall give you the rest of the details at the end of this session. As you all know, we have conflict all over the world, and we do not need to overemphasize that. In various regions in Ukraine, in the Middle East, not to mention the various countries in Africa that are facing conflict and war, not to mention DRC, Sudan, Somalia, among others. And this is the reason that Hekima University College feels indebted to try as much as possible to increase capacity so that even within our continent, we can have adequate people to be able to address this conflict, if not resolve them, at least to be able to mitigate the effects. And by convening this webinar, we are introducing you to a course that will give you in more detail skills and knowledge about what to do and how we can come together to address these conflicts. The course will include several topics to help participants to develop deeper understanding of conflict, the challenges, the mechanisms to address them, among others. And to help us with this session, we have invited Dr. Agnes Baer, whom I will introduce in a few minutes. This webinar will be divided into 2 sessions. The first session, Dr. Baer is going to give us a presentation, and this is just a snippet of the entire course. She will highlight the areas that we shall cover between June 3rd and June 10th in the certificate course. And then when she finishes her presentation, we shall open the floor for a few minutes for your reactions, for your comments, for your contributions and questions, if any. And so without wasting any more time, may I have the pleasure to introduce Dr. Agnes Baer, and I will take just a few seconds to read a summary of her bio. Dr. Agnes Baer is an assistant professor in diplomacy and foreign policy in international relations at the United States International University. She has a Bachelor of Commerce from the National University of Lesotho, a Master's in International Studies from the Institute of Diplomacy and International Studies, University of Nairobi, and a PhD in International Relations from the same university, USIU, Africa. Dr. Bear lectures in several courses from undergraduate to PhD levels in areas such as diplomacy, foreign policy, democratization, governance, comparative political systems, regional conflicts in Africa, US and Africa relations, among others. She is a great researcher, and her interest areas include identity, security, democratization and governance, refugee studies, state borders and insecurities, race and social problems, terrorism, counterterrorism, among others. And Dr. Bear has produced several publications. I cannot list all of them now, but they include areas such as xenophobia, ethnicity, security, social problems, and state borders. She has supervised several master's students in the same research areas and is in the process of supervising 4 PhD students in the same area. Dr. Bear also facilitates courses or lectures at the Hekima Institute of Peace Studies and International Relations. And having looked at her skills and her capacity, this is why we could not have selected any other person but Dr. Agnes Bear. So without wasting any more time, let me have the great pleasure to welcome Dr. Bear. Please go ahead. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much, Lucy. I feel very much honored, actually. I feel like I'm an imposter or something. Yeah, thank you very much, everyone, for coming today for this particular webinar. I want to say this particular course, no matter how many times I'm part of it, I always learn something. And this is because we are talking about a subject matter that is everywhere and that is actually ubiquitous. So I'm going to share my screen just to show you what exactly we should be thinking about when we go into the course. So I may not go into the particular modules that we'll be dealing with because I'll leave the facilitators to deal with particular issues, but I want to give you an overview of exactly why we are doing this particular certificate course. And I must tell you that even as the facilitators, we are always learning, because at the end of it, we have case study and group participation where we engage you to put in a case study and work with what you've learned. And of course, in the process, we also learn. And as I have gone through our various names, I know names cannot say where we come from, but it can give at least an overview. And I can say that because of the diversity that we normally get for this particular course, we end up getting so enriched as a group at the end of the 10 days. So let me just share my screen and go over what we will be seeing as we move on. Trying to figure out where my, okay, PowerPoints are. I will go off screen. Sorry, excuse me, I just need to move this in and I don't know how to move it. I'm gonna have to minimize it like that. I can't find the screenshot. Yeah, so the course itself, the question I ask is why this course? Conflict resolution, peace building, and reconciliation. First of all, I think we assume outrightly there is conflict out there that needs to be resolved. But the question then that we ask ourselves and why we roll out this course is it possible then to resolve that particular course that we are talking about? And then we are talking about peace building. I like one scholar, I think his name is Ken Menhaus, and he talks about you cannot build peace if there is no peace. So how do you go about doing peace building? Because most of the time you see that we just run into a conflictual area, and then we start to resolve the conflict and immediately begin to put mechanisms for what we call peace building. But the question is, can you really build a peace before you create it? And as Lucy has gone over some of the conflicts that we know in Africa, I mean, starting from Somalia, going to Sudan, DRC, of course, and various South Africa and various other countries, you would see that we are constantly engaging in this notion of peace building. But are you able to build peace if there is no peace? So meaning that you have to create that peace first. How do you create that peace? Hence, you go again to this notion of conflict resolution. As you'll come across the course, I'm sure the first, I believe the first presenter will be talking about understanding conflict, where you'll be defining what really is conflict. Because before you know what conflict is, you really are not going to engage in conflict resolution. And neither are you going to build any peace. You might think you've done these things, yes, on paper, but when you go back to the field, you realize that you have not done anything other than, should we say, waste resources for your country and organization or whatever sponsor that you could be having. And so that's why we bring this course, so that we bring these issues concerning conflict into focus. And why do we bring them into focus? Is because you would see that different areas or different countries, in fact, I can't even go to different countries, I would say different areas in each state have got different issues when it comes to conflict. So you need to know what particular conflict is in context in that particular region that you are dealing with as a practitioner, so that you know how to go about resolving this particular conflict. And again, as you go through the understanding part of conflict, part of Africa, and of course the contextual analysis of African conflicts, you realize again, you would learn several other issues like conflict management, conflict resolution, and of course, conflict transformation. So if you manage a conflict, can you start peace building at that particular point? And you realize managing is just exactly that, trying to deal with something very delicate. And so what you're trying to do is to find, should I say, a pocket within which now you can begin to talk about conflict resolution. And so this entails, of course, engaging all the parties involved, or what you would call stakeholders involved in that particular conflict. And so we challenge you during the course. Do you know who the stakeholders are? And I want to go a little bit back to something I had started with that looks out of this world, but you'd see how it works. The question I ask is, can you edit a blank page? And so what we are talking about, or what I'm trying to bring out here is, as a practitioner in conflict resolution and probably peace building, how do you see yourself? Are you a blank page, or do you have some preconceived notions of conflict and preconceived notions of context of the conflict that you're dealing with? And so you would see most of the time when we go into the field, we go in like we are going to deal with a blank page, meaning the conflict is out there, and then we are the carriers, or should I say the people who know about this particular conflict. And so you go straight in and you want to start doing what I'm talking about, conflict resolution and peace building. But I'm challenging you and saying that at any particular point that you go to the field, you are actually not a blank page, and you form part and parcel of that particular conflict in context. Why? Because as you've heard, I really love to research on identity and all that. As you've heard, as an individual, you're already a full package of a particular identity. So when you carry yourself into that particular field trying to resolve a conflict, you are actually imbuing conflict into the existing conflict by your own identity. So the question we ask you here during this particular course, are you aware of the package that you are in? And because of that, are you able to navigate the conflict field while you're trying to do conflict resolution and peace building, meaning you should always be aware of who you are, what you represent, even if it's not what you represent, is the perception those you are going to meet have of you. And because of this, you are able to preempt some of the, or should I say, nooks and crooks in the field of conflict and, of course, in the field of peace building. So what I'm saying is there is no blank page in a conflict, including yourself, because you form part and parcel of that particular conflict that you're going to. And so what we are doing with this course is we are trying to add on to this, what I want to call it, blank page in quotes, which is you, the conflict resolver or peace builder, and trying to show you who you are, or to ask you question, who are you, so that you know what exactly you package yourself in as you go into that field. And then what is this conflict that you're going to deal with? And then the other question is, what is even conflict? Does it exist, or is it in our minds? So any context that I would say that can be added, of course, to this particular page is likely to add value when it comes to you as a practitioner in the field, in conflict resolution or in peace building. And understanding, of course, that this notion of peace building is really nothing. It makes no sense unless there is peace in the field. So can you build peace when the conflict is at its maximum? Or how do you begin to build peace? Are you in conflict with yourself? Is the other question I ask. So you will see that we're going to the field to resolve the conflict, but I'm asking you, are you also in conflict with yourself? How often? How do you reconcile the conflict within yourself? If you ask yourself this question, which is a question I've asked myself several times, you would find yourself thinking so deep and even beginning to ask yourself, do I even know myself? This is how you approach a conflict in the field, because the dynamics of any conflict in the field are so ubiquitous that you cannot begin to just edit it and narrow it down and think you can resolve it quickly like that. Meaning there's a lot of thought process that goes into conflict resolution and, of course, peace building. What about the conflict outside of you? Are you aware of it? And again, when I say conflict is a bit ubiquitous here, I'm trying to say that ideally, every day we live in a conflictual society, within and without. So at no particular point should we lie to ourselves that we can completely eradicate conflict, because it's always going to be there. But the question is, what portion of a conflict do you want to deal with, and what do you want to see? So what I'm trying to say is being realistic as we go to the field. And the only way you can be realistic is to have, should I say, to be armed in conflict resolution and, of course, peace building, to be as much aware as you can before going into that field. And, of course, to remove the notion that you are taking the solution to the field, and to be aware that you and the field, or the people in the field, will be part and parcel of that particular solution. So how best do you go about it? How do you navigate this? So understanding conflict, I believe that's what you begin with. You would see that there is a lot that to be brought here on how to be aware of the conflict that you're dealing with, coming from different countries. Different sections of those different countries will give you probably a better glance of what you are dealing with. Contextual analysis of African conflicts. This part I really love. Let me just remove my video. It's distracting me, and show you what you're talking about. So we're talking about conflict in Africa. Some of the themes are really hitting on Africa, particularly, specifically. So look at the size of Africa. This is the other thing that I have realized, that most of the time, we really even not aware of what exactly we are dealing with when you're talking about this Africa. So what I'm trying to say is we are dealing with a vast geographic territory, to a point that saying actually conflict in Africa becomes very meaningless, And these some of the things that you'll be looking at when you're looking at the context of conflicts in Africa. I mean, this is the continent of Africa. As you can see, geographically, the United States, China, India, Eastern Europe, France, all of these countries can fit into this particular geographic territory of Africa. And so that tells you that the context of the continent in itself is vast. So even when you're coming just to deal with a section of a country in Africa, you have to be aware that the dynamics within that particular section are vast. And remember, I said you included as the conflict, should I call you resolver or peace builder in that particular process. So looking at the different countries, of course, in Africa, which I'm sure all of you are aware, you can see the numbers. There are many. There is something else here that probably I do not capture because this is just an overview when you're looking at the context of Africa. And this is the history of individual countries in Africa. As you are aware, this is a continent that was colonized by various colonial powers. And in the process, those colonial powers, of course, ended up rubbing off their cultures into these particular different countries. So you're talking about the country itself being very diverse. And again, you're talking about a context outside of Africa. And these are the former colonial powers and what they left behind and what they still have in common with this particular country. So you're talking about the interest these various countries have with extra-continental powers, especially the great powers. And by the great powers, I mean the US, China, the UK, India. You would add contemporary great powers, you add India there, of course, Russia, France, and so forth. So these extra-continental power also have a dynamics within this particular continent. So even when you're talking about conflict in Africa, it's very questionable because is it really conflict in Africa or conflict between Africa and other areas, other regions? And so, of course, by this, then you have to think about not just the vastness of the continent, but the diversity within each country. And by diversity within each country, I'm talking about implication of former colonial power and, of course, the attachment to the former colonial powers. And then within each country, you have something else that we cannot ignore. And this is, I don't know if the next map has something like that. No, not that one. And this is, I will talk generally about ethnicity. So each country has got diverse ethnic, should I say, composition. And again, within these countries, we also have diversity in religion. In fact, if you were to look at Africa at a glance, I would say that I think this map gives kind of a rough idea. The blue section, all the blue sections there, including Chad here, we're talking about most of them being Islamic by religion. And then the lower part of the continent, you'd have it being mostly Christian. I'm using the word mostly Christian and mostly Islamic because it is not the exact picture. It's just a general picture. However, if you go to each of these particular, for example, countries in Africa, there's something this scholar, and Ndlovu Gatsheni actually calls it, Professor Gatsheni Ndlovu calls it the northern factor. And what he refers to the northern factor is that in each and every country in Africa, there is a geographic territory that has a different religion from the other part of the same country. And this, though he calls it the northern factor, he says it's not necessarily, this different religion is not necessarily in the north, but it is at a certain section of this particular country. And because of this different religion from the other sections of the country, you would find conflict between the two major religious, should I say, tenets within that particular country. I want just to pick you pick any country you want, for example, in the map of Africa, and you find that there's always the Muslim section of the population and the Christian section of the population, and there's the other part that we overlook most of the time, and this is what I'll call the traditional religious practices of the African people. So if you look at that, you see, I've introduced just religion. It has split that one country into 3 sections. And this is not just 3 sections, because we are just talking about major religious practices. So because of this, you would find that there is that conflict between these regions. And again, this northern factor he adds, apart from having just a different religion, this northern factor also has something else. Underdevelopment. Why? Because the northern factor you'd find has mostly pastoral nomadic practices in an arid to semi-arid region. So what have I introduced here? I've introduced the economic differences within that particular country. So you'll find this semi-arid to arid region being underdeveloped, of course. And why is this region being underdeveloped? There's something else I'm going to add here. I hope I'm not selling out Hekima's course before it is sold out. But if you look at why there is economic differences, I'll go back to that thing I talked about, colonial factor. When these countries were colonized, of course, most of the those ones that had settlers, colonial settlers, they settled in very, should I say, lucrative regions of that particular African country. And so they did not go to settle in semi-arid or arid regions. And because they settled in these lucrative regions, they developed the capital cities in these lucrative regions. So do you see what's happening? We're talking about a northern factor, has a different religious practice, is semi-arid to arid region, and is underdeveloped. Why? Because you go back to the colonial factor where you see that the capital city was always, of course, put where it was lucrative, easier to carry out resources from that country to whichever umbilical cord connection that country had with this extracontinental power. And so this has introduced conflict in 2, or should I say 3 already dynamics. And so you can see that the context of Africa in itself, just by looking at an overview without you even going to read or practice, is a bit, should I say, tumultuous right from the word go. And so from whichever country you're coming from, if you look at what I'm talking about, you would see. So you'll come up with issues of marginalization, you come up with issues of being ignored, underdevelopment, and this contribute to conflictual issues within that particular country, so to speak. So if you look at the context, therefore, you can see that already you have so many things to deal with. And remember, I started with you as a conflict resolver and a peace builder. You're already also in conflict within and without, and you are transporting that conflict. So when you're going as a conflict, a conflict resolver or peace builder into the field, someone already has categorized you. Who is this person from? The north section, the south section. Is a Christian, is a Muslim? Who is this person? A woman, a man? Who is this person? You know, and all these factors. And already you are seen either as a perpetrator or a friend. And of course, this introduces other factors into the particular conflictual region. So the idea here is to make you as aware as possible of what you are dealing with, including things that you even don't know you are dealing with, so that as you go as a practitioner into the field, you are much more better placed to deal with what is coming or what you're going to face. And also you are very much aware that you can actually make things worse in the field, thinking that you have resolved issues there. So again, I just want to go back to the context of Africa. So we've talked about the geographic territory, the religious aspect, and of course, economic development or underdevelopment. And then you have resources in this particular continent. Most of these conflictual countries in the continent, you would see that they're highly resourceful. Then you ask yourself, if poverty is what makes us kill each other or cause conflict. So where we have in conflict in these countries with abundance or abundant mineral resources. So you see that you've introduced another dynamic there. And here you have again to be aware of who are the stakeholders when it comes to these particular resources in the continent. Who are the stakeholders? Who is benefiting? Who is losing? Because this is where you now introduce those issues of greed and grievance. That one who is fighting because they are greedy, and that one who is fighting because they feel that they have been aggrieved, or they've been their resources have been taken away from them. So they are fighting because of anger and all that. And where are you as a conflict resolver or a peace builder? Where are you? Are you aware of these dynamics? Is it something that you can transform completely? Is this conflict something you can transform? Which way are you going to do it? Is it best to approach it from the grassroots levels, or is it best to approach it from the power level? That is the people, you know, above in the states and all that. Or is it best to actually merge the two, grassroots and power, so that you can resolve this particular conflict? Then again, are there interest in resolving these particular conflicts? How best do you go about it? So you can see that the context in the continent is really, really something else. It is something you cannot really, should I say, digest it at one glance. But however, if you are aware of it, then you can know where to begin from. You can know how to deal with that particular, should I say, conflict. Yeah, I think I talked about ethnicity and religion, but ethnicity is another biting factor. Actually, this is from a personal observation. It's not me saying this is the right thing, but I say that ethnicity does not cause conflict. However, ethnicity is used as a tool to propagate conflict for those who are likely to benefit from that particular conflict. Because if you ask yourself, why do different ethnic groups fight? Then you will see that there's some sense of injustices going on within that particular society. And this idea of injustice brings me back to this particular point: African political system and conflict resolution mechanism. What type of political systems do we have? And you would see that initially, immediately after independence, in fact, most African countries, or should I say, quite a substantive number of African countries practice the parliamentary system of government. But with time, these leaders converted these political systems into presidential systems of government. And you know what that happens? What that means is power is centralized. And so with power being centralized, it means that only a few people can control what's going on within that particular country. And hence you go back to the resources, ethnicities, and all that. So how do you deal with a conflict in different political systems? And then you ask your questions. Do democracies foster peace can democracies foster peace in Africa? And all this. So you look at that and you see that it again goes back to the context of Africa, and of course the dynamics within this particular continent, however, within particular country, and I insist within particular regions. Because even if you are to go to a particular country, let me just pick, for example, Kenya. You cannot say that the conflict that you would find, for example, in the northern parts of Kenya would be the same as the conflict you would find in the western parts of Kenya. You see that they are totally different. So you have to deal with a particular context, however, with the notion of what is being perceived as an injustice in this particular region and how can it be resolved? And am I the right person to resolve this conflict? Or how do I package myself in order to be at least close to the right person of dealing with this particular conflict, and of course, facilitating peace building in this particular conflict. The challenges of terrorism, religion, and interreligious dialogue. Actually, I'll be the one taking this particular section, the African political system and conflict resolution mechanism, and the challenges of terrorism and religion. and interreligious dialogue. I'll be the one facilitating these particular sessions. And you see that these challenges of terrorism is an interesting one. I want to say, in fact, I'm just going to go off grid and say something here. There is a time and I'm telling you this so that you see how we can really miss the point. There is a time I was part of a group that they were looking actually to create what I would call not a course, to create a tool for resolving conflicts. And this particular group, of course, had a certain religious identity, if I may put it that way. And one of the areas they wanted to look into was the Central African region, North Africa region, and whatnot. But the team was insisting they needed to create tools for conflict resolution that were sensitive to their own religious identity. And I asked them, are you serious? So you want to resolve a religious conflict using your religious lenses. So how is it going to work? I asked, how is this going to work? And they say, whoever is not interested can leave. I was like, you are not serious, for sure. Because you can see what I was talking about. This particular group was completely unaware of how their identity or their package can impact the end results when it comes to conflict resolution and, of course, peace building. You're talking about terrorism. We know terrorism is heavily laden with the religious angles and tenets. And you want to go solve a problem of terrorism using your religion. Do you see where we have a problem? And that's why I'm saying that it is very critical to be aware of who you are, how you are perceived in the field, and how best to approach a particular conflict, and of course the context within that particular field that you're going to. So from that point, I told them, I'm washing my hands off. I am not going to be part of this tool you want to create, because I can tell you for sure, you're going to exacerbate the conflict in these particular regions, because what you're going to do is you're going to look down upon a particular identity in a bid to impose your own and try to resolve the conflict, which means you're going to make the differences even wider, the gap wider in the field, and cause more problems for these particular countries, and I do not want to be part of it. So as it were, I followed up, but that particular tool never took off. And you can see why, because it ignored a very obvious thing that we are talking about here, the context of the conflict, the person that you are or that you're perceived to be. I could be something different, but you already see me and you perceive me as something else. And so if I'm not aware of that, then I'll create problems within that particular issue area that I'm trying to deal with. And so, yeah, so in the challenges of terrorism, of course, we look at you and your package. How do you go to resolve conflicts that have these, should I say, lessons of terrorism or terror? How do you view the field? How is the field viewing you? How do you overcome that in order to be able to deal, should I say, well with those in the field and come to, should I say, a package that is best placed for the people you're trying to help or the country that you're trying to help? Yeah, so at the end of the day, like I said, we will use a lot of your expertise because we'll be dealing with case studies and also be dealing with your, should I say, examples in the field, the challenges you've encountered, and then we'll learn from each other. And maybe there are things you've come across that you are not even aware of. Once we start discussions within these particular seminars, then you will be aware that, oh my God, that's what actually happened. This is what I did, and that's why they responded like this, yeah? Again, learning to even be aware of body language and spoken language, silences and all that in a bid to try and resolve this particular conflict. Yeah, so I don't think I have much more to say about this. I would say that for more, we're of course expecting you in these particular classes, and the facilitators are as diverse as day and night, as I've told you. For you to get this, you need diversity. And for you to get this, you need to know that even you yourself, you are not one person, you are several people in one. And for you to be aware of that, it's already not a blank page. So you are beginning to edit from somewhere. And I believe at the end of it, we'll all have benefited a lot. With this, I guess I need to hand over back to Lucy before she starts making me to pay the fees for letting out the cat out of the bag. Yeah, Lucy, back to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bear. Kindly stop sharing the screen.
All right.
Ladies and gentlemen, could we have selected a better person than Dr. Bear? Hello? Hello?
Great.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
She's the
Kindly
best.
join me in
Yes, we can
appreciating.
hear you.
Kindly join me in appreciating Dr. Agnes Bear for that very, very informative session. Thank you very much.